tell the White House to withdraw the nomination, it would be sort of more in sorrow than in anger, like, oh, you guys screwed this up. Let me help you out of this embarrassment. Obviously, somebody with these problems can't be running a department. Now there's just no interruption in that process at all, except for the people in the swamp masks sitting behind the nominee in the hearings.
You know what's happening out there now, Rachel? The kids, the kids, the high school kids, they're saying, what are they talking about?
I know.
What good old days are they talking about?
Yeah, that's why we write books.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Well, if you're a high school student in America, you have never seen a Republican in Congress take a principled stand against a Republican president. It wasn't always this way. Principled Republicans stood up against Richard Nixon. Bill Weld was one of those principled Republicans. He was a young lawyer working on a congressional committee with another young lawyer named Hillary Clinton. When Bill Weld later went to work in the Reagan Justice Department, he took a principled stand against the Republican Attorney General Ed Meese, and Bill Weld resigned in protest, which then forced the Republican Attorney General to resign. Bill Weld went on to serve 2 terms as a Republican governor in Massachusetts. He is now the only Republican running against Donald Trump for president. He will join us tonight on a night when the president is trying to turn back the presidential clock to the Nixon presidency and stonewall the Congress. And at the end of the hour tonight, we have a special guest joining us who has not been with us before. He will respond to Jared Kushner's statement today that the Russian attack on our election that helped Donald Trump win the Electoral College was nothing more than a couple of Facebook ads. We will be joined by Robert Anderson, who will be making his first appearance on this program. He's a former assistant director of the FBI's counterintelligence division. He will expose the lies that Jared Kushner told today about the Russian attack that is proved beyond a reasonable doubt in the Mueller report. You will want to hear what he has to say about all of that. On a day when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi once again publicly tried to steer the House of Representatives away from impeachment, the president ended the day with an historic decision that may now be speeding him toward impeachment. The president announced in an interview tonight with the Washington Post that he will try to block any of his current or former staff from testifying to any congressional committees about the contents of the Mueller report or any other form of investigation of the president. Donald Trump is trying to turn the presidential clock back to the early spring of 1973, when President Richard Nixon found it inconceivable that his staff would testify to the special Senate committee investigating the Watergate scandal. When the Watergate Committee first considered calling White House counsel John Dean as a witness in the investigation of President Nixon, the president said that that was impossible because of executive privilege. President Nixon said, well, because it is executive privilege. I mean, you can't, of course, no president could ever agree to allow the counsel to the president to go down and testify before a committee. But because of pressure from Democratic and, very importantly, principled Republican members of the committee, President Nixon eventually surrendered to that pressure on May 22nd, 1973. Christopher Lydon reported in the New York Times on a new written statement that day by President Nixon offering his surrender on executive privilege. A single sentence near the end of his long statement today marked the decline of the controversial doctrine in Mr. Nixon's recent interpretations of it. Executive privilege, the president declared, will not be invoked as to any testimony concerning possible criminal conduct or discussions of possible criminal conduct in the matters presently under investigation, including the Watergate affair and the alleged cover-up. Hillary Clinton, who went to work as a staff member of one of the committees investigating President Nixon, remembered that this way today.
The witnesses in 1974 and 73 and 74 were predominantly administration witnesses. They were John Dean, who happened to be White House counsel. So it's fully appropriate for this Congress to call Don McGahn, who happened to be White House counsel.
Don McGahn was subpoenaed by the House Judiciary Committee yesterday, and that will apparently be the first witness subpoena that the Trump White House will fight in the House Judiciary Committee's hearings about the Mueller report. In an interview with the Washington Post tonight, President Trump said, quote, "There is no reason to go any further, and especially in Congress, where it's very partisan, obviously very partisan." Richard Benveniste, a former Watergate prosecutor, told the Washington Post, "It seems to me executive privilege was waived when McGahn was permitted to give testimony and to be interviewed by special counsel Mueller. I don't see how the White House can assert executive privilege with something that has already been revealed." Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, issued a statement saying this: "As such, the moment for the White House to assert some privilege to prevent this testimony from being heard has long since passed." A source close to former White House counsel Don McGahn told the Washington Post this: "He's not eager to testify. He's not reluctant. He got a subpoena. It compels him to testify. But there are some countervailing legal reasons that might prevent that," said one person close to McGahn who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private discussions. "He doesn't want to be in contempt of Congress, nor does he want to be in contempt of his ethical obligations and legal obligations as a former White House official." Also tonight, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin delivered a written response to the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Richard Neal, about Chairman Neal's demand that the Internal Revenue Service deliver 6 years of Donald Trump's tax returns to him. The law very specifically and clearly allows the chairman of the tax writing committees in the House and the Senate to see any tax returns they choose to see. The law puts no limitation on their rights to examine tax returns. This law has never been challenged or defied by the IRS or the Treasury Department in its nearly 100-year history. Secretary Mnuchin said that the administration is still reviewing the demand for the tax returns and that the Justice Department is now researching the legal issues involved, but that they will have a final official response to Chairman Neal on May 6th. Leading off our discussion tonight is a member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He is also a candidate for president in the Democratic primaries. Also joining our discussion, John Heilemann, national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. He is co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus. And Jennifer Palmieri, former White House communications director for President Obama and former communications director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, is also joining us tonight. Great to have you all here. And Congressman Swalwell, I want to start with you. I've had a member of the Judiciary Committee, at least one, on every night since the Mueller report came out, because it seemed so obvious as soon as we had it in our hands that Robert Mueller was basically delivering this to you on the Judiciary Committee, as special prosecutors have in the past. He clearly has passages in there where he contemplates impeachment, contemplates your committee considering impeachment. And here we are tonight with the President of the United States saying, in effect, there will be absolutely no cooperation with any subpoena you send involving any aspect of the Mueller report.
We have a lawless president right now. The law and order doesn't mean anything to him, and he's banking on the American people not caring. They care. That's why they gave us the majority back in November, was to end, these abuses of power, put a balance of power on them. So to people like Don McGahn and the individual today who ignored our subpoena, who oversees security clearances, and others who may be subpoenaed, I tell them, why don't you obey the Constitution and just come in and testify and disobey a lawless president? That's doing the right thing. I don't give Don McGahn points for telling the truth under oath. I mean, is that the standard now? I would give him points if he disobeyed the president and those countervailing legal principles, or whatever he wants to call it, and come before Congress and lay out the number of times the president disobeyed the law. We're going to hear all of this eventually. We're on a road to impeachment. It's not a road that any of us asked for. And I think the first waypoint is going to be to hear from these crucial witnesses, starting with Bob Mueller.
Nancy Pelosi clearly didn't think you were on a road to impeachment earlier this afternoon. This is before Donald Trump made this move tonight. What Donald Trump has done tonight changes whatever Speaker Pelosi might have to say about this tomorrow. This is one of those things where you can't be in control of what happens next year because of this president.
Again, it's something none of us have asked for. And the way I look at it, there are a number of different ways to protect against an abusive president. First, the voters. If the voters elect someone and they're abusing the law. Then you have the checks and balances. The voters gave that. We're exhausting the remedies. We're trying oversight. We're trying the power of the purse. He shut down the government. He's refusing to honor subpoenas. So where does that leave us? The only other remedy is to impeach him and suggest removal to the Senate. And that's where he's taking us right now, not by choice, but just by the way that he's acting. Lawrence, I have a 2-year-old. I count to 3 and I take away the toys when he misbehaves. I know if I don't do that, he's going to get worse. We have an awful kid in the White House. If we don't count to 3 and start holding him accountable, it's just going to get worse.
Jennifer Palmieri, you worked in a White House. You worked in the presidential campaign that was victimized and attacked by the Russians, successfully attacked by the Russians in support of the other candidate. Your reaction to what you're hearing tonight from a president saying there will be absolutely no cooperation with any of the subpoenas being issued by the Judiciary Committee. The president doesn't want any of the witnesses to show up.
The thing that surprised me about the president's, the interview that he did with the Washington Post, he did with Bob Costa, is that he felt the need to justify why he wasn't going to allow anyone to show up. Normally, and that suggests to me that they might be a little unnerved in the White House. Normally, he would just say, Russian hoax, it's a witch hunt, I'm not going to cooperate. But he felt the need to say, we already did cooperate. I had these people already speak to Mueller. They don't need to go to Congress, too. And if you look at the scale of the people who are being called up to Congress, it's a lot of people that are not necessarily under his control anymore, right? Don McGahn, you see Mnuchin wrestling with whether or not he's going to give his taxes. I thought it was interesting that Mnuchin didn't just shut that down, but said, I'm going to come back to you in a couple of weeks with another answer. You have Mr. Klein, who is the individual that used to approve the security clearances. He's refused to show up. But there are a lot of pots involving the president's legal standing that are starting to boil over. And it suggests to me, the way the president is handling it, that he's feeling a little unnerved, as he should.
John, is this a run-out-the-clock strategy? Is this, they want my tax returns. The law clearly allows them to have my tax returns. Let's come up with some kind of legal reply that says we're not giving you the tax returns, which then forces Chairman Neal into court, which takes, we don't know, a year and a half, takes us up to the next presidential election. Is that what he's doing with the Judiciary Committee? No witnesses, fight through every subpoena in court all the way to the Supreme Court to get each witness that you want so that he can run out the clock in a presidential campaign.
I think it's sort of cute and quaint to suggest that there is a strategy in play here, Lawrence.
As opposed to chaos, you mean?
Well, as opposed to just panic and fear over more disclosure, what will happen if more of the truth comes out. I think the strategy, that may be what they think they're doing. What it seems to me that is actually the net effect of this as a political matter is they are inviting impeachment. They are begging for impeachment. They are making impeachment much more likely. Your point a second ago, Nancy Pelosi and House leadership did not want to pursue impeachment. To a large extent, large parts of Congressman Swalwell's caucus still doesn't want to pursue impeachment. But the president, by pushing, by not just having obstructed justice already on the plain meaning of what obstruction is, as laid out in the Mueller report, he's still obstructing justice by trying to say no because Congress is partisan, which is what he says to Costa. He says they're partisan, so I can't cooperate with them. By defying the subpoenas, by provoking this constitutional clash, by doing the things he's doing, he is making it impossible for Democrats not to impeach him. Whereas if he had played this smart over the course of the last few days, he was aligned with Nancy Pelosi. Neither wanted impeachment. Now he's making it more likely with every move that he's making.
What about that, Congressman? Is the president's decision tonight in effect, forcing your committee to consider impeachment in a quicker timetable than you might have?
I think it shows a complete disrespect for the law and that he's not going to follow the law, and we're going to have to enforce it. We're going to have to hold in contempt the people who refuse to come forward. And I don't think people want that for their reputation. They should just do the right thing and come forward. And again, if you take a step back, if this was just about Russia and the lies he told to cover up Russia, maybe you could say, well, naive campaign, didn't understand what they were getting into. He was trying to protect himself. I don't buy that, but maybe you could say that. But we've got the emoluments clause still outstanding. That's going to court. We've got him telling the commissioner for Border Patrol, hey, violate the law and I'll pardon you if you get in trouble. I mean, there are so many other outstanding issues that we just have to do something. Doing nothing is not an option with this guy.
Jennifer Palmieri, Jerry Nadler has some subpoenas that he wants respected both by the witnesses and the courts. Might he decide that in order to add weight to those subpoenas in court, in any court fight over them, he simply changes the title of what the hearing was going to be to an impeachment inquiry?
I guess that's an option that's available to him. I think that everybody's right that that Trump's poured accelerant on the fire, and that could lead to impeachment. But I still think we have courts to weigh in. You got a long way to go before you're actually at that point. And I don't know that it needs to be at odds with what Speaker Pelosi has said. I think, what she said is Congress has to uphold its constitutional responsibility. It's got to hold the president accountable. It's got to, and it has to pick up the Mueller report and hold hearings on it and follow that where it leads. It just may lead to this, an impeachment outcome, a little sooner than it could have if, as John points out, Trump was smarter about it.
Jennifer, I have to ask you, as a veteran of a presidential campaign, we see the presidential candidates responding to the impeachment question differently. Elizabeth Warren was out there right away after reading the Mueller report saying, yes, you have to go to it. It's a matter of principle. You don't have a choice. There's a variety of responses we now have. What would you advise a presidential candidate, if you were working on a presidential campaign now on the Democratic side, to handle the question of impeachment?
I think it's such a serious matter that I think how everyone should handle it is to say that Congress needs to follow its constitutional responsibilities and pick up the Mueller report, hold hearings on it, and follow that path wherever it legitimately leads, putting aside any political concerns and partisan concerns. And if that leads you to impeachment, then so be it. And if it leads you to suggest that that's not in order, then so be it. But it is, we have a president that doesn't abide by rules of the Constitution, and it's really important that Congress in this moment, whether it's politically popular or politically expedient or not, do that. And that's how I think presidential candidates should also answer that question.
John, you've always been of the school that Donald Trump is his own worst enemy. Is that what we're seeing tonight? Because we've seen, and I completely understand Nancy Pelosi's political strategy on impeachment, both last year when she didn't want it to be part of the House races in which she won the House of Representatives, and how much she has not wanted it to get in the way of Democratic Party politics this year, how she would rather have a wounded Donald Trump on the presidential ballot when the general election comes. I get all of that. Yeah. Donald Trump seems unable to see what Nancy Pelosi was in effect trying to do, trying to get the Democrats past this. And he seems to be crashing right into the impeachment process.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's interesting that, we have noted many times that Trump seems to respect Pelosi, and he seems to get that she is a master tactician and strategist. And yet, in this instance, even though he knows that and has acknowledged it in various ways, he does not seem in this moment, a crucial moment, where it was not that hard to figure out what she wanted to do and how she wanted to let this thing play out. He did not seem to be able to figure out whether that's because he doesn't have enough people around him advising him, or he is just blind to it, or more, I think, likely, blinded by his rage, the rage that we've seen come out, the extraordinary thing of we've witnessed with him on Twitter over the last few days, where the ridiculousness of all of his aides going out on the air of the weekend saying he's never been happier, and then all of his public behavior betraying the fact that he is still filled with anger, filled with panic, filled with fear. Everything he's doing suggests that at this moment, to the extent that he ever has operational political faculties, they are now totally out of whack. And he is, I think, as I say, by provoking her, by provoking the Congress, by continuing to behave in ways that no sensible majority party in Congress can tolerate, he is, again, forcing Democrats to do that which I think many Democrats would prefer not to do.
It's almost like when Johnson lost Cronkite, right? Trump he doesn't want to lose Pelosi. I mean, she's actually been giving him the benefit of the doubt. Like, do the right thing, follow the law, cooperate.
Wait
we don't
for
want
the
to do
Mueller
this.
report, which was never necessary, which is not what the Democrats did with Nixon. And now her new call was to wait for the unredacted Mueller report, which also functions as a delay tactic for Donald Trump, which he couldn't accept.
Yeah, you don't want to lose Speaker Pelosi on this. She's given him every opportunity to cooperate, and now he's pushing her and I think the Congress into a position where there's no other option.
We're going to have to take a break here.
Speaker Pelosi's pretty smart. I think Speaker Pelosi's pretty smart. I think she understood when she laid out her ground rules that Donald Trump was likely to ignore them and lead himself to the spot that he finds himself in now. So I'm not sure that she is taken by surprise by this or didn't understand that from the get-go when those words first came out of her mouth. She knows what she's doing.
That is a really great point, Jennifer, and I had not thought of that. But yes, if this is a rope-a-dope, Nancy Pelosi has quite a dope that she's been roping into this. Congressman Eric Swalwell, John Heilman, Jennifer Palmieri.
Okay, that was good. That was very strong.
Very strong. For joining us. That was not written. When we come back, Bill Weld, the only Republican presidential candidate running against Donald Trump, will join us. And later, the former assistant director of the FBI's counterintelligence division will join us to consider what Jared Kushner had to say today about the Mueller investigation and the successful Russian attack on our election, which helped win the Electoral College for his father-in-law.
Hi, it's Katie Tur. Want to keep up with MSNBC while you're on the go? Subscribe to the MSNBC Daily Newsletter. You'll get the best of what you've missed during this unprecedented era of news. Text MSNBC to 66866 to subscribe.
Today, Hillary Clinton reflected on the early days of her career when she found herself on the congressional staff working on the impeachment of Republican President Richard Nixon in 1974.
I was one of the young lawyers who actually drafted the memo about what is a high crime and misdemeanor. And it was truly meant by our founders to describe actions that undermined the integrity of our government, that placed the personal or political interests of a president over the interests of the nation.
She was one of the young lawyers who drafted that memo. The other young lawyer working on that memo about high crimes and misdemeanors was a Republican, William Weld, who is now the only Republican candidate for president running against Donald Trump. Those two young lawyers both had big futures in politics in their parties. Bill Weld became the two-term Republican governor of Massachusetts after serving as the U.S. attorney in Boston, appointed by President Ronald Reagan. And after that, Bill Weld was promoted by President Reagan to become the head of the criminal division of the Justice Department. Bill Weld grew up in the era of principled Republicans and principled Democrats, along with corrupt Republicans and corrupt Democrats. And what the impeachment investigation of President Richard Nixon showed is there can come a time in politics when you have to stand on principle over party. We showed you that last night when the only Republican member of the House Judiciary Committee who voted for all three articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon announced his vote on impeachment.
Now, I'm a Republican. Party loyalty and personal affection and precedents of the past must fall, I think, before the arbiter of men's action, the law itself. No man, not even the President of the United States, is above the law.
If you're a high school student in America tonight, you have never seen anyone like Larry Hogan in the Congress. You've never seen that. You've never seen a principled Republican in Congress take a stand against a Republican president. But the principled Republican used to not be so rare, and Massachusetts produced more than its share of principled Republicans. Elliot Richardson was elected lieutenant governor of Massachusetts in the 1960s and then attorney general of Massachusetts before he joined the Nixon administration, serving in 2 cabinet positions, including Secretary of Defense, before becoming attorney general during the investigations of President Nixon. When, on a Saturday night, President Nixon ordered Elliot Richardson to fire Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, Elliot Richardson refused and resigned in protest. And in that moment of standing on principle against the President of the United States, Elliot Richardson became the model of integrity for every attorney general who has followed him, some of whom have clearly not lived up to the Richardson standard. One of those was Ronald Reagan's Attorney General Edwin Meese, who was accused of using his public office to enrich his friends. Bill Weld resigned from the Reagan Justice Department in protest of the Republican Attorney General's conduct.
Indications this morning that the legal problems surrounding Attorney General Edwin Meese may force more defections from the Justice Department. The department was rocked Tuesday by the resignation of Deputy Attorney General Arnold Burns, and he was followed out the door by William Weld, head of the Criminal Division. Both called it quits after they were unable to persuade the White House to dump Meese on grounds that his legal troubles are hurting the department. Officials say Meese was stunned and was hardly able to speak when told of the resignations.
Bill Weld then testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee against the Attorney General.
The question is whether Mr. Meese is taking official actions that he knows are going to redound to the financial benefit of his friend, and I suggest that he did so.
Shortly after Bill Weld's testimony, Attorney General Ed Meese resigned. Those were the days when corrupt Republicans had to deal with principled Republicans. Joining us now is Bill Weld, former Republican governor of Massachusetts and candidate for president of the United States. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Lawrence.
I want to lean on your experience as a federal prosecutor, as a Justice Department official, to get your reading of the Mueller report.
I've been thinking a lot about 1974 recently. In the train coming down from Boston to New York yesterday, I read Bill Barr, A.G. Barr's 19-page report about how really you can't ever accuse a sitting president of anything in the criminal realm. And you know, Bill Barr is a very distinguished lawyer and a very good guy. I've known him for a long time. But it lay in my mind that he apparently never read United States versus Nixon, the July of 1974 case, unanimous, including 3 Nixon appointees that said the president is not above the law. And that led to Article 3 of impeachment against President Nixon, contempt of Congress for contumaciously refusing to comply with lawful subpoenas, you know, which we have going down today. So history is repeating itself, and I think the same errors are being made again. I think the Mueller report gives us kind of a window into Mr. Trump's mind, if not his soul. And I think things are moving from narcissism to megalomania. You know, only I exist. This, of course, is what narcissists, and particularly malignant narcissists who like to see other people lose, think in their heart of hearts. And I fear that Mr. Trump does have designs on becoming what the founders and the writers of the Constitution most feared, and that's a tyrant in our country.
If this was the young Bill Weld on the staff of the House Judiciary Committee right now, on the Republican staff, would you be talking about impeachment proceedings?
I'm not so sure about impeachment. I say that not for legal reasons, but for political reasons. I actually think, contrary to what others do, that those boyos over at the White House are dying to have impeachment proceedings initiated so that Mr. Trump can scream like a stuck pig for the next year and a half and not really have to engage on anything. He'll just say, witch hunt, you know, overreaching. And it does seem unlikely, although I probably know half a dozen Republicans in the Senate who might, be persuaded to do the right thing if the evidence is as strong as Mueller's report suggests. But It's probably not going to be enough. And then you're going into the election with the Senate having refused to convict and remove the president. And it's going to give him just a delicious talking point for the last few months before the election. I think the most important thing is that everybody behave themselves so that we don't have 6 more years of let's everybody lie. Let's not just circle the wagons, but everyone has to lie. Oh, you mean you can't lie because that's not true? What's your point? This is a man whose first reaction is to lie about everything. Say what you want about President Nixon. He had the self-awareness to recognize that he had done wrong, and he resigned. And, I'm not sure that Mr. Trump has that self-awareness. Thank you very much.
And Richard Nixon was a trained lawyer, and it seems like there were several points in the investigation where Nixon, the lawyer, understood that there was no legal alternative in the next move, that he must, in fact, submit to the Supreme Court.
Well, he certainly understood it after the 9-0 Supreme Court case, because those tapes were turned over instantly, and he had to know that they were his undoing. They had him, lying on television to the American people, and that was enough to remove Mr. Nixon. Everyone said, oh, that's one thing you can't do, is lie to the American people. It happens in this administration almost every day, sometimes on little things, sometimes on very big things.
The point you were making, that one of the articles of impeachment was specifically about what the president is doing today,
right,
which is refusing to comply with legal and legitimate subpoenas that are investigating criminal conduct.
That's right.
When they are investigating the Mueller report, they are investigating suggestions and evidence of criminal conduct in the Mueller report.
No, that's exactly right. And what Mrs. Clinton said yesterday, she was Miss Rodham when I knew her then, and we did work on that memorandum together, but was absolutely right about the grounds for removal. And I think it was she who came up with the theory based on the failure to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. The president takes an oath to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Well, I mean, this president mocks the rule of law. So it couldn't be clearer. Volume 2 of the Mueller report could not be clearer about criminality.
Could you stay with us across the break? We squeeze in a commercial here. We're going to be right back with former Governor Bill Weld. As of tonight, Bill Weld is the only Republican running against Donald Trump in the Republican primaries. Will former Ohio Governor John Kasich be next?
You got to recall, I never supported the guy. I never endorsed him. I didn't vote for him. I didn't go to the convention. And a lot of people wondered why. Well, it's right in front of you. If you don't want to read the whole report, just read parts of the report, the kinds of things that were happening in there. I'm not only disappointed and angry, I'm sickened by all this, because this is not the kind of performance or the kind of behavior that I saw from so many of the presidents I've either observed or have known.
We're back with former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who is running for the Republican presidential nomination against Donald Trump. How does it feel like to be the only one, and how long do you think you're going to be the only one in this field?
I don't know. I spoke with both John Kasich and Larry Hogan before declaring last week and invited them both in, and they both said, we applaud what you're doing. We're all on the same team. Let's see what, the fall brings. I think they're not going to get in unless things change. Whereas I'm very happy to get in right now and to try and make things change by enlarging the electorate, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's what Eugene McCarthy did in 1968 when he got in against Lyndon Johnson on the Democratic side. He had no expectation of winning. He only said he was going to run in 4 primaries. He ended up running in more. But then he showed there was incredible vulnerability for Lyndon Johnson. Bobby Kennedy jumped in. So is that something that you envision possible here, especially in New Hampshire?
I intend to run a national primary, except for parts of the Deep South where it really wouldn't make a lot of sense for me. But I'll start in the 6 New England states, led by New Hampshire, then go to the Mid-Atlantic states where I'm a native and I spend a lot of time. Then this next month in May, I'm going to go out to California, probably Oregon, Washington. California is Mr. Trump's worst state. They don't get along on anything. That's a lot of electoral votes. I will strenuously contest New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
In the modern history of the presidency, any challenger of a president, an incumbent president, re-election in the primaries, who stayed in after New Hampshire, did not win the nomination. But that president did not win re-election after being damaged in the primaries.
In all 5 cases, the president did lose the general election.
Yeah.
None of the challengers won.
Right.
But in all 5 cases, except maybe Nixon, who was challenged by Pete McCloskey, as you pointed out.
Speaking of Nixon, President Nixon eventually, as we talked in the last segment about his as a lawyer and his understanding of the law and his understanding eventually of the inevitable power of it, he chose to resign just when the articles of impeachment were voted on. He didn't wait around for the House of Representatives to vote. He didn't wait around for a trial in the Senate. What about this president of the United States? Should he, for the good of the Republican Party, if he could ever think that way, resign the presidency?
Forget the good of the Republican Party, for the good of the country. If he had the self-awareness that Richard Nixon had, sense of shame is too strong a word, but self-awareness is probably too soft a word, he would resign. We would be better. The truth is, we would be much better off with the President Mike Pence than a President Donald Trump.
And what about the Republican Party? What do you make of the difference between the Republican Party you worked with during the impeachment of Richard Nixon and where this congressional Republican Party is now?
Yeah, when I worked in the House, when I worked in the Senate, lions still strode the earth. People listened to each other. It was a different day. The last 15 years have been totally different and poisonous. And as everybody knows, the two-party system in Washington has gone into a death spiral embrace, and no one's really interested in working together on anything. I'll tell you, if I get in there, I'm going to have a bipartisan cabinet, and on day one, just as I did as governor, reach right across that aisle.
And you wouldn't be the first one to have a bipartisan cabinet, because that's the way it often used to be.
For sure.
Bill Weld, thank you very much
Lawrence.
for joining us again tonight. We really appreciate it. When we come back, the former assistant director of the FBI's counterintelligence division will join us to consider what Jared Kushner had to say today about the Mueller investigation and the successful Russian attack on our election that helped his father-in-law win the Electoral College. Jared Kushner told a couple of very big and very obvious lies today about the Russian attack on our election that helped his father-in-law win the Electoral College. Robert Anderson will join us with his reaction to what Jared Kushner said today. Robert Anderson served 21 years in the FBI, including 12 years under former FBI Director Robert Mueller. He was an assistant director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. This is his first time joining us on this program. Robert Anderson filed a declaration in the case of Maria Butina, the Russian who pleaded guilty to conspiring to act as a foreign agent. In his declaration to the court, Robert Anderson said, based on my review of the information, Maria Butina, in fact, provided the Russian official, which may have been shared with others within the Russian government. I assess that this information was substantial intelligence value to the Russian government, and that Russian intelligence services will be able to use this information for years to come in their efforts to spot and assess Americans who may be susceptible to recruitment as foreign intelligence assets. What does a foreign intelligence asset sound like? Would a foreign intelligence asset say that the Russian attack on our election was nothing more than a couple of Facebook ads? And that the Mueller investigation has been more damaging to the United States than the Russian attack on our election? Is that what a foreign intelligence asset would sound like? Because that's what Jared Kushner said today. Robert Anderson will join us next.
What we did learn is that the Russians had a systemic overall assault on our electoral system. And what we also did see is that the President of the United States engaged in behavior that was unethical, unscrupulous, and beneath the dignity of the office that he holds.
The same audience who heard that also heard this pair of lies from the president's son-in-law.
You look at, what Russia did, buying some Facebook ads to try to sow dissent and do it, and it's a terrible thing. But I think the investigations and all of the speculation that's happened for the last 2 years has had a much harsher impact on our democracy than a couple of Facebook ads.
Joining us now, Robert Anderson, former assistant director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. He is currently the CEO of Cyber Defense Labs. Mr. Anderson, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really are eager to get your perspective on this. Let's start with what Jared Kushner said today. First of all, it was just a couple of Facebook ads. And secondly, the Mueller investigation was actually the worst thing that happened to America.
Well, good questions, Lawrence. Glad to be here. First of all, I think it's sad that somebody that's close to the President of the United States, is supposed to be one of his trusted advisors, cannot see the threat that the counterintelligence and intelligence operations posed by Russia. And then I think the second thing is obviously I think the Bob Mueller investigation and all the men and women that work with him has allowed us to see a very clear picture of how this White House is run. And I think he's also pushed some questions back to the Congress to see if they can answer those around the president.
If the Time 100 had invited the Russian ambassador today to speak, would he have said anything different than what Jared Kushner said? Wouldn't they say, well, it was just a couple of Facebook ads, or even if they would admit to that, didn't do any damage, and the Mueller investigation has been very harmful for America?
Right. I mean, I think one of the things people need to understand is when you talk about intelligence operations, especially from sophisticated adversaries like Russia, with a president that's a former KGB officer serving, those operations are very complex and in-depth, and they can use varying different types of operations. And I think people need to be aware that some can be very innocent in nature, and some can be like the kind you see on TV, the high-speed operations where people are steering classified information.
And your assessment of what you've read in the Mueller report, especially in Volume 1, in the Russian attack section of the report.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me, and I don't think it surprises a lot of the men and women that have worked for years like I have against these type of adversaries. The one thing that I worry greatly about, quite frankly, is the fact that, look, they're not going to go away. Russian intelligence officers and intelligence organizations are like bullies on a playground. They don't understand please and pardon me, and I guarantee you that they're already back, if they have even left at all, looking at ways to try to get close to not only the people in cabinet level positions, but any of the men and women in our country that are currently running for office, especially the upcoming presidential elections.
And the Mueller report shows the Russians actually launching a massive attack. They reached their communication reached over 90% of our voters. And this is what Jared Kushner was trying to diminish today.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that's a good point, Lawrence, is when they make any type of intelligence operations, they're never a single point of failure. So the fact that they looked at cyber operations, hacking into the DNC, political motive operations on Facebook, and then trying to influence people in and around the presidents with different types of meetings, that is a classic attack of Russian intelligence services. It's well coordinated, properly funded, and very potentially aggressive against the United States.
The president has done, at his end, has done absolutely nothing, and Jared Kushner has done nothing to defend against the next